Thank you. I hope you can all hear me. I see a lot of green out there tonight, which is fitting on two levels. It's also St. Patrick's Day, another festival of wretched excess that will lead to some hangovers tomorrow. And I have to say I'm at a great disadvantage because Niall Ferguson has that accent. He could read the phone book to you and it would sound a lot smarter than I do. Before I get going, I just want to quickly address something that Niall said. Niall was talking a lot about institutions that were involved with residential home finance. And there's no doubt that residential mortgages, are a huge part of this crisis. But the two banks that have collapsed in the last year, the two Wall Street banks that have effectively collapsed in the last year, Lehman and Bear, really weren't all that involved in the residential mortgage finance business. Not to say they weren't involved, but they weren't as involved as a lot of other people. And the reason I point that out is because the issues here are a lot larger than Fannie and Freddie or the home price bubble, as significant as that is. So let me start by going back to the resolution, which the resolution doesn't say we need more regulation going forward. I don't think anyone on this panel, anyone in this room would disagree with that. And the resolution doesn't say that bankers should all be put on a desert island and forced to make their own society. You know, I guess that's the Hamptons, but sorry, Jim. What the resolution says is blame Washington more than Wall Street for the financial crisis. And that is flat wrong. And to understand why, like Neil, I want to take you back to the Depression and to the creation of the SEC. Now, the Depression was the last time that there was this kind of public anger at Wall Street and at big business in the United States, and understandably so. And when the Roosevelt administration created the SEC, one of the things that they considered doing briefly was having the SEC have the power to prevent companies from selling shares, not because they were committing fraud or misrepresenting their financial statements, but simply because the SEC's economic experts would find, well, this company doesn't have very good prospects. This company has too much competition. We're not going to let them sell shares. And that idea didn't go very far. It was very rapidly rejected, but it was considered. But why I think this is so important and interesting is it shows that even during the Depression, even during a time when unemployment was 25% and there were breadlines and there was really a question about whether capitalism could work, and there was an alternative model that seemed to be working in the Soviet Union, even then the United States went with a relatively permissive regulatory regime. And that's always been our history. And to me, that makes sense. That's, and if you think about your own life, if you think about your own business as whether you're a lawyer, a doctor, whether you work in retail, whether you're a landlord, whatever it is that you may do, you probably have a better idea where the opportunities are, but also where the problems are, where you can take advantage of your customers, where you can cut corners, than any regulator could, no matter how closely they monitored you. It's your business, it's your life. And so the regulator needs to set the rules, but in the end, you succeed or fail on your own. And think about the commercial airline industry in the United States, which is really a great success story in the most important way, which is that it's extremely safe. You can count the number of jet crashes this decade on one hand in the United States. And we're going towards zero. And I don't think that's because the FAA is a better regulator than the FDA or the SEC or anyone else. I think it's because there's a commitment in the airline industry to safety. Now, whether they define that as a moral issue, we need to protect our passengers and our workers, or whether it's a practical issue where they believe that there might be economic repercussions, people might not want to fly if there were too many crashes, I don't know. But there's no question that the airline industry in the United States is extremely safe. And I think it's not a result of the FAA. I think it's a result of a commitment within the industry. Compare that to Wall Street, which appears to have been run by a bunch of greedy children for the last 10 years. And greed is a crucial word there, because although Neil sort of, he mentioned the compensation and then skated past it. Compensation is a crucial, crucial part of understanding what went wrong on Wall Street in the last 10 years. When you can make $1 million or $10 million or in some cases $100 million for a year's work, you don't have very much incentive to run your business for the long term. If theoretically you're being paid in stock and your compensation is going to be restricted over a long time, you have more incentive. But even so, if the numbers are really, really large, it's unlikely that you're going to think long term. And so I think Jim, I think Nell will talk to you about some of the specifics of what went wrong on Wall Street in the last 10 years. But at its core, the issue is relatively simple. There was a huge amount of leverage taken. There was inadequate capital to support the risks that the banks were taking. When you make loans, some of them are going to go bad, and you need to have enough money in capital, in equity, to handle those losses. And the banks simply didn't have that. Now, did Washington create the conditions that allow that to happen? Sure. Could we and should we have had a much more robust regulatory system? Absolutely. Regulation is vital. Regulation sets the playing field. It sets the rules. But in the end, you have to put blame where blame is due. And blame is due on the firms. It's due on the owners. It's due on the managers. It's due on the executives. It's due on the employees. To some extent, although to a lesser extent, it's due on shareholders because the shareholders didn't properly manage the boards of directors. But that's something Nell can talk about. But in the end, blame accrues to Wall Street, not Washington. Please keep that in mind and vote against this resolution. Thank you.